this is all the background of why Kesarbagh becomes a very important site to, from today's perspective, to see, to map it from a feminist agenda and see what it can now become for today's society. So there are two aspects to any mapping. One is that it should be any data that you do, but whether it's any data has to be argumentative. Your argumentation is your legend. People tend to look at any transformation in a negative way. That there is some historical building and then they say, oh my God, there is a concrete building coming up and these kind of interventions should be stopped and this is wrong. But we are not interested in that. We are interested in seeing that, all right, if there is some addition that somebody is doing, that means that they need that kind of a change. Because our agenda at the end of the day was like, we wanted to use Kesarbagh as an experimentation for creating inclusive public projects. What is an inclusive public project? And after a lot of deliberation, we also realized an inclusive public project is probably a public toilet.
This masterclass shares experiences of mapping various derelict and ruined industrial sites to explore their potential for renewal. It discusses feminist mapping methods developed by the speaker over several years through close engagement with a new materialist scholarship. It specializes in ruins as hard-based territories, seeking other than human life forms that exercise their agency when human agency receives and imparts lessons for architects on designing with restraint. Now, as we move forward with our event, it is time to acknowledge and honor the brilliant minds who have joined us today to share their valuable insights and expertise. Moving further, I would like to welcome Sonal Mithal, co-founder of People for Heritage Concern. She is an architect, artist and educator known for her work in conversation and public art, including the award-winning restoration of Surat Castle.
Thank you, Elev8. Thank you, Isha, for having me here. And thank you all of you for your time and your engagement with this work. Although the title says it's mapping practices for adaptive reuse, I have slightly broadened the topic and I will share with you some of the processes that I've been developing in mapping various sites, and whether it is for adaptive reuse or it is for design, it becomes very essential to understand the politics of the place. And politics includes many things. It's not just the electoral politics, but the politics of who occupies, who gets marginalized, and so on and so forth, including, as was mentioned in the brief, where it may be also the politics of human and the non-human that occupy sites. In this particular talk today, I will primarily share one project that I developed in the studios that I've been conducting at SEPT. So this is what you will see. Although I do not have names, I really acknowledge the work of all my students here who have been participating and contributing to this growing work in progress over the years. Can move on to the next. So I've been working for a long time in Lucknow, which is in the north of India, and there is a particularly Kesarbagh. If anybody familiar with Lucknow in the audience? So Kesarbagh, this is a historical painting. Kesarbagh was a palace complex. Was actually not a palace complex. It's usually in popular imagination, it's considered the palace of the last Nawab Wajid Ali Shah. But our research has proved that it was actually the garden extension of the palace that was here. And this garden was what I argue is a very feminized and a very feminist garden space, which gave a lot of agency to queer existences. It was also women were able to exercise a lot of their agency in this place. So I use Kesarbagh as a site for experimentation related to mapping processes and how do we start looking at the world from a feminist perspective. So Kesarbagh becomes a very important site. So these are some examples of Kesarbagh where Vajid, who is the ruler, who actually starts to express his politics through ishq or institutionalized ishq, in which he is always not at the top but always with the people, although that became like the way in which the British thought that that is not the right way a ruler should behave, but he did not think so, and that is why he was a very popular ruler. I will not go into a lot of details about these things, but because Vajid was, this is Vajid, and yes, you can move on, because he's always like, his politics is in relation to celebration of life, of rituals, of festivals. He did not differentiate between the hierarchy that a ruler should have and being a people. He always worked by being a people. And that was something that was discouraged and also looked down upon. But in my work, I try to validate that is, a feminist way of working with people, bringing your vulnerability to the table and so on. So this is Kesarbagh, the site of Kesarbagh, which was mapped by British after they took it over from Vajid. He was sent to Kolkata, and they really broke it into different parts. So, very quickly, in the archives, they talk about Kesarbagh. The colonial writers write about Kesarbagh as if it's vulgar, it's debased, it's bad, and debauched. And they also write about Vajid in that sense. So, yes, there are it just goes on and on and on. But now, coming to the architecture, and this is something that might be of interest to you, that was all the background. Why it's debased and vulgar for the British eye is because at the end of the day, it may not make sense. It does not follow the modernist ideals of composition. It also does not follow the classical ideals of composition. They have spiral staircases that don't go anywhere. There is decoration. Hello. There is decoration which is tacky and so on. So these are the ways in which they have written about the architecture of Kesarbagh. It's tacky, it doesn't make sense and so on. And in my work, I try to read that and say, well, it's tacky, but that is its beauty. Who says the tackiness is not beautiful and so on? These are some historical imagery of the place. And so, you can move on. Oh, Kesarbagh. And so on. Okay, sorry, you have to go back one step back. Yes, one more. One more. Yes. So in the Bagh, and if you remember the painting, there were all these various pavilions. Like one pavilion is like this, one pavilion is like that, then there is something else. There is no apparent uniformity of structures there, and that is why it was called vulgar. But what is happening is that it was an ongoing 365 days, 24/7 ongoing theatre. So Vajid and his 370 wives would always be in a perpetual state of theatricity, and this huge Bagh was that theatre setup. So these pavilions, these vine trellises, this is called the Lanka, these were all set up. These were all sets, theatre sets for them to do their dance, drama, performance, and so on and so forth. And these then, this is one of, again, there's a huge theatre set for a dance drama within the Kesarbagh. And then it was demolished by the British because they said it's like, we don't understand this thing. So this is all the background of why Kisa Park becomes a very important site to, from today's perspective, to see, to map it from a feminist agenda and see what it can now become for today's society. So all of this was background. The British then cut it off, cut the whole of Kisa Park and gave it to talukidars, who were the revenue collectors for the British and who sided with them. So now it is all held by the talukidar elites of the city. This is how they cut the whole bark into several, chopped it up. Let's move on. Let's move on. So now begins the actual project of how do you map and what do you map. So we are not interested in mapping the buildings, what they were and what they were not and how they are. That only becomes the base. We are interested, if you are interested in understanding the politics, then we map the erasure and appropriation. So we did our environmental studios and the following maps are done by my students, Arvina and Karishma. So we created a base map. As I said, we are definitely not interested, for any purpose this map would be enough. But for us this is not enough, it's the base. This is how it begins. Where were all the buildings, the footprints of buildings, walls, gardens. Okay, so for every mapping, the legend is always very important. So there are two aspects to any mapping. One is that it should be any data that you do, whether it's any data has to be argumentative. Your argumentation is your legend. So the first aspect is that any data should be uniformized. Your capacity to uniformize that data on the map is key. So if you do a lot of annotations and all that, I'm not a huge fan of annotations because you're not then able to see the relational aspect of any data. To relationalize it, you have to uniformize that data. And then you have to analyze that data for its capacity to become uniformized, which means that every set of data you should be able to represent it uniformly. Second aspect is that the data should be spatialized. You should be able to put it on the map. Yeah, so if you are not able to put that data on the map, then it's not a mapping. Then it just remains a commentary and it remains an annotation and it's of no use. So one of the first things that we said is, all right, we will start looking at the buildings in terms of whether they were removed, whether they were taken over by the British and reused, which is like appropriation, or whether they were built upon, so that is superimposed. So every building was then studied in these aspects. Now when you look at, there are also two aspects, garden and the built. So then this has to be readable and it has, so there are at least 6 components in the legend. So we use very minimal color and we use textures to that extent such that it starts to become legible. Then we start problematizing. So from erasure, superimposition and appropriation, what is the further nature of that? What are the various typologies within that? So is the superimposition in the form of a road over a garden? Or if it is a superimposition of a road over the built form, if it's an appropriation of something. So the more you start to expand on this legend and start to create another set of textures and all, it starts to become even more, starts to become very complex. But it starts to become argumentative, and you will also see that none of these things are clear. Some of the things may start overlapping. But that's alright. Don't be very scared of doing this thing, it's alright. The map then starts to become very messy. And it's alright, because that is where the politics emerges. So these are some, details of the mapping. We also insist on doing vectors. All these maps are vectors. We use Illustrator to do that. Let's move on. And again, where in the site are we zooming into? Let's move on. I'm not going to the details. Same thing, then we start looking at the entire site in great detail. Yeah, move on. It's the same thing. Now, so that was one aspect, which is just looking at the erasure, superimposition, and appropriation of the build form. The second is the second argument that we are making for Kesar Bagh is that why was it vulgar and why was it debased, right? And we want to validate it. We want to say that it was debased and vulgar and because it discomforted the British. But what is the value in that? Why did it start to discomfort? And one thing that we realized is that are you able to hear that despite the...
Yes.
Huh? So one of the things that we realized is that the spatial typologies in Kesar Bagh did not align with the real typologies. The clarity of a garden being a garden is not there, or a bedroom meant for a bedroom is not there, or it's the court room in a palace is actually not a courtroom. So the typologies which we are used to, or which the British were used to, were not really the true typologies, and so they flouted the rules, and that is why it was queer, and that is why it was also very interesting and important. And so we start mapping the spatial typologies in Kesar Bagh. Still, the base will always have that footprint of the buildings, but we start to first create a legend. At the beginning of any mapping exercise begins the legend, and we want to see the extent of how many typologies will there be. So uniformization, right? So we say that, in the Budget's time, there was a folly, which is this. Then there was a performative typology, there was an ecological typology, residential, so on and so forth. So these are the ways, by looking at the buildings, we translated them into these big typologies. We gave them a code. And the same thing for the colonial layer and same thing for the today's layer. And now we start seeing that what is happening on the site. So this map was produced by Jinal Tong, and she said that for me it's a glitch. So from the vulgar, what was vulgar was not vulgar, she argues that it's a glitch. And she created this very beautiful map which looks like a quilt, tapestry kind of a thing. And superimposing all these three layers, like this one is Budget's layer. She maps all the buildings which are of very weird typology using that same legend. Then for the colonial layer, and for today's layer forward. So she does that for each of the buildings, and then she superimposes all of them. So every building has gone through a series of typological changes over time, and the complexity emerges when the layers are superimposed. Yeah, so the complexity emerges when all the layers are superimposed on each other. And so you can see the legend is always there, but at any given point, the layers should also be revealed through each other. And at the end of the day, there is also, the map is also by itself, we see that the layers are not very clear, and in that reveals the politics of the place, that it's always interwoven and contesting each other. Yes. These are some of the details of that map. And again, I want to emphasize on the first point that I made, that every information should be uniformizable when put on the map. Now, how are we getting these data? This data seems like very simplified in terms of map, but we had to go through like 15 books in which the data was written in the form of a text. That data gets moved into the database like an Excel sheet. Then it gets transformed into this legend. So by the time it comes here, it has gone through a lot of filtration. It's not like readily available to you. You have to produce that. You have to analyze maybe a text, or maybe you have to analyze an image and then convert it into this thing. Similarly, then this is done by Kinjal. She was mapping the ecology of the place, where she looked through a lot of archives to see what were the vegetations and all that were being planted, and she did it for three: the current, the colonial, and the Vajra style. I'll not spend too much time on that. So she was also looking at not just that, but soil condition, water requirement, the planting type, and basically we were like, understanding that is the plantation during the colonial period having an impact on the ecology of the place? Making an argument whether it was or not. So we had to study the plantations along with the soil condition and the water requirement and so on. And the repetitiveness of each of the inquiry is very important. Again, uniformization of data. And that data should be spatialized, that is, you should be able to put that material on the map. And you can see that there are no annotations. Okay, now we also looked at like the infrastructure of Kesarbaugh, which was related to the ecology. Yeah. So here again, the mapping was done in 3 parts, and this was done by Ghazal Nagani, and she was like again looking at the soil conditions, the various kinds of trees, and where is the water coming from, and so on and so forth. It was an extension of the previous map, but she is also drawing upon a lot of archival imagery, which she is trying to spatialize on the map. And then through the mapping, she was also arguing that during the time of Vajra, there was a very clear interrelationship of the water systems and the ecological entities, but during the British, it started to fragment. So this is during the British times, which shows the interrelationship, and all of this is coming from archival studies, where it's maybe you have to read like 500 sentences and you might find like somewhere one thing. So yes, move on. And you see during the British time, it starts to fragment when they started to systematize the thing. So the map starts to become argumentative. And it also tells us that, all right, if we want to revive the system, where will we have to intervene or not? Let's move on. So these are just details of the colonial layer. And then this is the post-independence layer, yes. And then from that emerge like inferences of what can be done for the ecology of the place today. Yes. Now, how are we doing on time? Because they're like making a lot of maps. So now this was the non-human part, but there is also a lot of contestation in terms of people who occupy the place. And so today also there is contestations. Who occupies what, and in the occupation, some people get marginalized. So we also tried to map that. I showed you that map of 1890s, which we found in the archives, which referred to when the British took over. They gave many buildings on the periphery to the talukidars. And so and that is to a different scale and so on, we put all that information on our base drawing. And you start seeing that this dark pink layer starts to emerge in which the buildings were given out to the talukidars. Today they are very important buildings, like right now I'm just going from here back to Lucknow, and there is the Sanat festival happening. So it's happening in the Safed Baradri, and it's happening in the Salipur estate. Like very important people are giving talks and all that. So this has become a very important cultural space now. So we start mapping ownership patterns, who owns, and ownership basically, and what buildings has existed, what buildings don't exist now, and it starts to again appear like just by having different legends, it starts to appear as a very contested space. They're not very clear boundaries. Same thing. So in 2023, what are the ownership patterns and how it starts to overlap? And here we were trying to identify places. Are there any public spaces that are shared in nature, which are not private, in which we can intervene? Because our agenda at the end of the day was like, we wanted to use Kesar Bagh as an experimentation for creating inclusive public projects. What is an inclusive public project? And after a lot of deliberation, we also realized an inclusive public project is probably a public toilet. And toilets are also very contested spaces, like sometimes toilets become places that people don't want to be seen. They are always very gendered and so on and so forth. They are also very exclusive because, queer people are not able to have access to toilets in some places. So we were trying to, bring together all this politics, and we were trying to identify locations at which we could install public toilets, which were inclusive in nature, and what is the nature of that public toilet. So the adaptive reuse is for the entire site, and for just a very simple thing, where do you place public toilets? We are looking at the politics from very far away, and that is not part of this project. The nature of public toilets that we proposed here range from inclusivity in terms of gender expression, but also from ecological purposes, formats. And there is a book that is coming out actually next week. We are launching it at SEPT. So if you are here, please come and take a look at the book, because all this politics comes out in the form of a public toilet in Kesar Bagh, and so it is not going into oblivion. All of this is leading to a project. And again, like we have been arguing for a very long time, that Kesar Bagh is a queer place, and so one of the mappings that we did is what are the queer architectural elements. This was done by Meghna Padmanabhan, and it's a colorful map, and these are some of 20 aspects. Like there are many more, but she just identified 20 queer elements, and we have written about it. Why are they queer and so on. But this is one map. Now, coming to the ecological aspect and the human-non-human relationships in Kesar Bagh, Jay Kishore was very much interested in looking at the swallows that he found in Kesar Bagh. And so he followed their paths in Kesar Bagh. And again, you can see the base map is the same. The ability to spatialize and uniformize the data is again very important. So swallow flight paths, which are at a certain height above ground, swallow flight paths that are closer to the ground, and looking at the ground condition, we also realized that if it's open ground, then swallows fly at a certain height. If it's grassy, then they fly at a certain height, and so on. So this is what he did. But then he also realized that actually they are nesting in the old historic ruins of Kesar Bagh. The Vajats this thing. So when it started to become crumbling and it got abandoned, it started being appropriated by swallows. So if you want to create place for swallows, then you might have to learn what the ruins are doing, such that you are able to create certain spaces which are not really clean and sanitized for more than human people, more than human existences to also live. So this was leading to that kind of an exercise. So here the legend starts to become that what are the architectural parameters that are necessary for swallows to thrive, and what are the ecological parameters. He also did a study of the squirrel movements, and let's move on. I don't think we need to get into the details, and also the movement of the walls. Now, this I think is the last bit of the mapping. Here, usually when we talk about adaptive reuse, we start to map that, and especially in conservation narrative or heritage narratives, if any of you work in that domain, that people tend to look at any transformation in a negative way. That there is some historical building and then they say, oh my god, there is a concrete building coming up and these kind of interventions should be stopped and this is wrong. But we are not interested in that. We are interested in seeing that, all right, if there is some addition that somebody is doing, that means that they need that kind of a change. So we don't call it transformation, we don't call it new things coming up or something which is a nice or unsympathetic addition. A lot of people use that word. We call it retrofit. So this is a mapping of the retrofit. This is the base map. So we call the retrofits are all in blue, and there is a very detailed legend about the nature of the retrofit. So is the retrofit in bricks in elevation, or is it a retrofit which is in the form of an extension leading to an open space, or is it a retrofit in the form of an extension that makes the space bigger? So we are looking at the nature of retrofit as if it's useful to the people. Once we identify this, we are able to quantify and say, all right, this is the nature of transformation that we can pitch for when we are talking about the reuse or extending the life of the structures in Kesalba. These are some details. Again, the same legend appears and these are the details. They also show what they are observing, and then they are drawing it, and then they are mapping it. This was done by Shivani Dulkunde. Same things. And then in the ruins, like in the swallow case, we also start looking that when a building becomes ruined, what are the ways in which the ruination is happening? What is its materiality? And in its materiality, is it allowing for vegetation to grow? In all conservation projects, the vegetation is considered the enemy, and the first thing we do is remove the vegetation. In our project, we started to see actually that the vegetation is consolidating the structure. So we are interested in seeing what is it in the ruin that is letting the vegetation thrive. And so we are mapping that. This was done by Shivani Mithal. And so we start to see what are the various kinds of vegetation that is happening. Is it like a parasitic interaction? Is it a proximal interaction or a physical interaction? Again, same thing, without going into the details, we standardize the information and then we spatialize. Again, you can see there is no annotation except in the legend. Same thing. So whether it's the building is falling, there are punctures or there are like ledges that get created, whether the mortar is weakening and so on. And this led us to actually do interventions in small areas for what can be a space, like can we create a new library space using the ruins as an experiential place where the vegetation also thrives and it becomes a public area. So thank you. So any questions if you have? Thank you. So as I said, we did the part of this mapping. I mean, this mapping has had several lives and it's a work in progress. Like I keep working on that now. So part of this mapping has led to this project of looking at and designing public toilets, which are inclusive. So where are they located? What is its architectural expression? And what makes it inclusive is all getting derived from these mapping and also from the history and the memory of the place, like how Wajid conceived this place. The other afterlife of these things have been to design, like as I said, libraries or public places within this thing. Some of the afterlives of this kind of mapping has been to do little interventions like let's put an elevator in this building because now, historical buildings, when you conserve them, they have to become accessible. Again, from a feminist, not just from a feminist viewpoint, but from accessibility. It's very important. But sometimes, because we prioritize historical buildings, we don't want to touch them and make them accessible. But that is a problem. It has to be made accessible, and sometimes you will have to change the building for that. So these kind of mapping where we do not necessarily validate or valorize that this is an important building and this is its style, we are not validating that. We are validating what is its capacity. And to become contemporary and to always be contemporary whenever it is. Which it was contemporary at the time, it will be contemporary here and so on. So we are not interested in freezing buildings for the historical this thing.
So my question is about what you have explained, that congratulations because the work is amazing. Something I feel when I visit Lucknow or I visit Kaiserbagh, it's that nowadays you cannot see any relation between the space because it's fragmented. So that sort of work you are doing, do you think can help? Because otherwise, so when you understand the things that are remaining or some new things that can be built, there is a relation between them. Nowadays, you cannot feel that. And I mean, the perception of the place, it's reduced, no? I mean, you will enjoy much more. So I was wondering that sort of work you are doing can help, at least in the future or mid-term future, that to understand the place. Just not just like always giving the past was amazing and now it's not. No, but whatever is today, if you understand the relation between the different spaces, built and unbuilt, you will enjoy much more the place. And it's a shame that it's totally fragmented and also fenced. So each building is like an individual building, and it was not like that. I mean, it was a relation between them. I think it makes the space very interesting.
Absolutely, and I mean the fragmentation is really very sad, and also I think we bring it out in the contested spaces that there are these areas that have been cordoned off and made private, even though they were public, and so they're not accessible to people. Like public areas are privatized in the sense that they're taken over by the state, or they're monetized, or they are ticketed, or they are timed, and that makes it not accessible. So definitely there is a lot of contestation, and it's very sad. And there's something to be said about, we're trying to put this exhibition in the Safed Baradari. We're working towards that. But the first thing is we'll start talking at the Sanat Kada. And I think it would be simple steps to just bring back that memory that it was a whole one thing and not fragmented, because it's not part of the public memory at all. The fragmentation is real. Questions? Yes.
My question is, while conserving the old buildings, what kind of material you prefer? You create like old material, or you prefer the new materials?
I do not have a straight answer to that, but if it is deriving from a certain mapping agenda, then the commitment is to use contemporary materials, because there is no way, also like ethically or even technically or even realistically speaking, you cannot create the materials of the past. It's just not possible because somebody wrote past is a foreign country. You can't access it. It's a myth. So I don't agree with that. So we use contemporary materials. You may use sympathetic materials, or sympathetic materials can be of today's technology. Your kilns are different, your soil is different. The composition, like I remember Ratish Nanda, who works in the Aga Khan. He was once talking to me and he was like, Sonal, tasle mein farak hota hai. Every aggregate mix that you make is gonna be different. So he who was like, one of the leading conservation figures, he's like, there is nothing like, the material of the past. So I don't think so we need to take that too seriously, too hard. I think it's a myth. Yeah, it's like, so definitely use contemporary materials, which can be, and in that you also bring today's time, and the building then becomes a evidence that it was restored or it was changed during this time, and then or the other time. So I think it's all right. Like, you're part of the history.
I was just curious as to this mapping exercise. Was it done as a part of the history and conservation, masters in history and conservation, or was it a part of architecture, history and research?
It was part of a design studio. So I will do that if I teach an undergrad studio. I will do it if I teach a postgrad studio. This was particularly done for a postgraduate architectural design studio. That course got shut down. Now I do the same thing in conservation studios. And I treat conservation studios as design studios. So yes, because what I want to insist on that this is mainstream. And the problem of design studio not doing this leads to taking positions which are uninformed. So design has to precede research of certain kind and a commitment to understand the politics of the place, no matter what discipline you're working in. Like, this work is, if you really want it to tag, then I would say architectural design. All right, thank you so much. Thank you again for giving me this platform.